Hi, I'm George Barna with the American Culture and Faith Institute. We do a lot of research on faith and culture. And as a result of that, one of the questions that I frequently get has to do with what's the state of the church in America today? There are a number of traditional measures that we can turn to give us some insight into that. We could look at church attendance, we could look at Bible reading, we could look at Sunday school attendance, we could look at frequency of prayer. We could look at a lot of different things, but almost every measure that we have, if we look at it historically, we see that the numbers are declining. There's another way that we could look at this, and that's to try to get an understanding of how many born-again Christians there are in the country. How many people are embracing the gospel? And when we look at that, what we know is that over the last 15 to 20 years, that number has decreased from about 45% down to today's number, which is just 30%. Yet a different way of evaluating this is to turn to a big research project that we recently finished here at ACFI, and that looked at the worldview of American adults. What we discovered there is that only 10% of American adults have a biblical worldview. That is, their way of understanding and interpreting and responding to the world is based on biblical principles, but only 1 out of 10 people live their life that way. You know, it's kind of interesting because we know that 7 out of 10 Americans call themselves Christians. We know that half of all Americans think they have a biblical worldview. And yet what we're finding is that only 3 out of 10 Americans actually have embraced Christ as their Savior and could be considered to be Christians that way. And only 1 out of 10 actually have a biblical worldview. So we're not who we think we are. Again, when you think about some of the implications of this, consider the fact that if half of our population thinks they have a biblical worldview, but only 1 out of 10 actually does, a lot of people aren't even going to be open to learning more about how to refine their worldview. They think they've already got it figured out. And when we look at our churches, we know that they're investing primarily in adults, not in children. And yet we know from not only our research, but that of many other groups, that the influence on a person's worldview is heaviest during the years between 18 months old and 13 years old. So we should be investing in the worldview development of children, but that's not what we're doing. We know that adults have been asking their churches, would you please help us figure out how do we take biblical principles and apply them to the issues of the day? And yet what we learned from our studies with theologically conservative pastors is that pastors by and large are not willing to do that. So we have this real paradox where on the one hand, we like to think of ourselves as Christians, maybe even as a Christian nation. We like to think that our churches are strong and doing good work. But on the other hand, the evidence is suggesting maybe we're not doing what we think. Maybe we're not who we believe we are. I'd invite you to sit back and reflect on your life. What is your worldview? What are you trusting for your salvation? What do you believe will happen after you die? What do you want to see for the future of America? And what are you going to invest to make that future come about? It's a time of great challenge and upheaval in America. It's important that you answer these questions, not only for you, but for the nation at large.